so we're going to begin by hearing from our town manager. Beth Rudolph has served the town since 2004, which I find amazing. Let me just say that. First as an assistant town engineer, then town engineer, and for the past 13 months as acting town manager. She holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in water resources engineering, both from Tufts University. Prior to joining the town, Ms. Rudolph worked for the United States Geological Survey and several large engineering consulting firms in the Boston area. Beth lives in Winchester with her husband and 2 sons. She loves anything outdoors and is happy when hiking, biking, skiing, or traveling. I would be remiss not to mention that Beth and the departments she leads, the select board and town meeting have all been continuously supportive of the work that we do here at the Jenks Center. So Beth, please come up.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here this morning. I'm happy to be here today to talk on Winchester's commitment to being an age-friendly community, and even more excited to hear and learn from the other speakers we have here this morning, which is a fantastic lineup. Is that better? Okay, thank you. When I think about aging in place, I think a lot about my maternal grandmother. She was born in 1910 and widowed in her late 30s with a 5-year-old daughter, my mother. My grandmother never learned to drive and relied on public transportation for much of her life to take her everywhere she needed to go, to work and for all her errands. Some of my fondest memories of her are the trips we would take on the bus to go for lunch or to the department store. She would always encourage me to bend my knees so I could try to get on for free as I was growing taller. So I probably owe the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority a few dollars. My grandmother lived to be 92. She lived independently for all but the last few years of her life. It was the resources of her community that allowed her to do this, including a widow tax abatement program that helped her stay in her home, access to public transportation, and her ability to walk to many of her destinations, including the post office and library. Here in Winchester, the 2020 census released last fall indicates that almost 18% of our population is over the age of 65. As I'm sure you all know, and as Tom mentioned at the top, our community was designated an age-friendly community by AARP in 2019. The program focuses on helping people live comfortably in their homes as they age, enhancing personal independence, and encouraging older adults to have an active role in their community. The designation means that our community has made a commitment to actively work toward making Winchester a great place to live for residents of all ages. Winchester is extremely lucky to have this amazing facility for our senior community and maintain the partnership between the Council on Aging and the Winchester Senior Association. The Council on Aging was formed in 1973 when town meeting approved its creation, and the Select Board appointed an 11-member committee to serve in an advisory capacity. The town is well served by a dedicated Council on Aging staff who support Winchester's seniors through a variety of services, including social and health services, support groups, financial counseling and tax assistance, educational programs, nutritional services, transportation, and housing counseling. The town itself provides in-kind support services to the operation of the Jenks Center through DPW trash removal, snow removal, and landscaping assistance. The educational programs and activities offered at the Jenks Center provide a tremendous opportunity for seniors to socialize and engage with their peers, which is critical to combating social isolation in our older population. The intergenerational programming offered also allows seniors to connect with some of our youngest residents, which benefits both groups socially and emotionally. One of the most important parts of the AARP designation was helping reinforce the need for the town to look at our community development through an age-friendly lens. For the remainder of my time, I'd like to focus on a few key areas: transportation and walkability, housing, and economic support. As town engineer, I've spent a lot of time thinking about our community's transportation network, specifically how we can make our roads and sidewalks safer for pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles. How we encourage our residents to use alternative means of transportation instead of relying solely on their cars, We spend a lot of our time thinking about this type of safety around our schools. How can we make it safer for kids to walk to school so that their parents don't feel the need to drive them every day? But it's important that we expand our thinking to include our older population as well. Part of creating community that promotes the independence of our senior community is making our town more walkable. A lot of things we are already doing achieve that goal. We've recently finished a few projects around town, one at the corner of Church Street and Waterfield Road, and the other in front and back of the McCall Middle School, where we've expanded the sidewalks, made crosswalks more visible, improved our handicap accessibility, and shortened the length of crosswalks. These changes improve safety for pedestrians, but especially for our older residents who may need extra time when crossing the street. We are currently in the process of developing a townwide master plan, which I like to refer to as a townwide brain dump of all the traffic-related concerns and issues that staff and residents have throughout town. This plan will help us better understand the connectivity and safety issues that are important to our residents and allow us to lay out a roadmap to address priority areas. Independently, the Select Board has been working to study pedestrian safety in the town center through the Downtown Initiative, where we are working with a traffic consultant tool design. Some of our concept plans discussed include expanding the width of the sidewalks on Main Street between the Rotary and the Arizona River to a width of 16 feet, which would allow for additional outdoor space for pedestrians, but also provide room for outdoor dining on the sidewalk without the need for taking parking spaces. Some of the other ideas discussed for the center include the installation of raised crosswalks, sidewalk and safety improvements at the Rotary, increased lighting, and a shared street concept for Thompson Street. Right on cue with the lighting. Finally, one of the largest transportation improvements for our older residents over the past few years has been the creation and expansion of the vehicle fleet at the Jenks Center, with the 2 vans currently in operation. The town was happy to work with the Council on Aging regarding the purchase of these 2 vans, which meet a critical need in our community to help residents access their medical appointments and other necessary trips. The next topic I want to touch on briefly is housing. It's no secret that the Winchester housing stock does not include a sufficient number of deed-restricted affordable housing units or naturally occurring lower-priced rental or home ownership opportunities. Further, the diversity of our housing stock has diminished over the past few decades as smaller homes have been redeveloped into properties with larger footprints and more bedrooms. In 2016, about half of households in Winchester had an annual income of $150,000. And 35% of households had an annual income of less than $100,000, which is below the area mean income, or AMI, for the region. 19% of households qualified as low income, meaning they make 80% of AMI or less and are eligible for affordable housing. These households often include our older residents, many of whom are struggling to stay in and maintain the homes that they've lived in for decades, as the cost of living and property taxes increase. In 2018, the Select Board adopted a housing production plan with 2 main goals. First, to increase the supply of affordable housing for low-income households, and second, to increase the supply of naturally occurring affordable housing for moderate income households, such as young families, older residents, and smaller households. Over the past few years, the town has made great strides in reaching these goals. In June, after many years of work, the town meeting approved the lease of the Waterfield lot next to the MBTA commuter rail station to Civico to redevelop as affordable housing. The project will create 60 residential units, 20 market rate units, and 40 affordable units, all deemed affordable at 60% AMI or below. Additionally, 2 huge steps forward have been made in affordable housing initiatives at this fall town meeting, which is currently underway. Last Thursday, town meeting approved an amendment to the town's zoning bylaw that allows by right development of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, as long as the resident of one of the units is a person with a disability or age 62 or older. The bylaw will expand the range of independent housing options for older and disabled residents by making available more housing that is smaller and less expensive than current alternatives. It will also bring more security and social and personal support to our older residents. Last night, town meeting approved the sale of land at the corner of Washington and Swanton Street to the Melanson Development Group for redevelopment of the site into 60 rental units. Some of you may remember that last fall the town took that property via eminent domain after town meeting granted us the authority. It's the property right at the corner of Washington and Swanton that's been in very poor condition for many years now. The project will be permitted as a 40B, and 14 of the units will be affordable at or below 80% AMI, and 2 of the units will be affordable for households earning at or below 60% AMI. Prior to the adoption of the Housing Production Plan, only 1.8% of the town's housing stock was considered affordable on the state's subsidized housing inventory. The town is currently at 4.9% with the approval of two 40B projects on Cambridge Street and River Street, which are currently under construction. That number, the SHI, will increase to 6.4% once the Waterfield and Washington Swanton Street projects are permitted. Finally, the last item I wanted to touch on today are the opportunities for our older residents to get assistance with their property taxes in Winchester. Our assessor's office runs a number of tax abatement programs, including programs for veterans, blind individuals, and residents over the age of 65. In the current year, there are 84 participants in these programs. Additionally, the town and Council on Aging offer a community service program for residents over age 60 who own their own home and are income eligible, including middle-income seniors. The program provides $1,500 discount on property taxes for participating residents who complete 125 hours of community service in a given year. Jobs are available in the school, library, and town hall. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity today to discuss the town's initiatives related to aging well in Winchester. The quality of our community is gauged in part by our ability to support and foster economic, social, and generational diversity. And the conversations like these are important to helping us meet this goal. Thank you very much.
So, you know, just a comment before we move on to our last speaker. And I really appreciate not only the presentation that I Ching gave us, thank you, Betty, but also the work that's being done, work that has taken years and years and will take years more. You know, at the Jenks Center at the Council on Aging, one of the things that we know, and it's a core strategic pillar for us, is economic security. And we know in this town, economic security for many people means the lack of affordability of housing and the pressure that that places on them, and ultimately even the isolation that can result as economic pressure mounts. So the things that we're talking about in terms of increasing housing that is more affordable is something that is very important. And it will result in some trade-offs for sure, as the only way to do that is to produce more housing, which will produce some more density. What we need the planning board to do, and indeed these kinds of conversation, is do that as thoughtfully as possible. And I believe we are making progress on that. Anytime one of these issues comes up at town meeting is a matter of intense debate, as it should be. And that usually produces a much better outcome when we respectfully engage each other and share our ideas. I happen to live in the town center. I would say that the beeping reverse signal on trucks has become the soundtrack of my life. But it is what it is. It's kind of one of those kind of prices for some progress. I happen to think the greater density in the town center, this is my opinion, but the greater density in the town center, if done correctly, can help our local merchants, can create more vibrancy within the center itself, and can lead to the kinds of improvements that we're talking about. And another reason why you should fill out the survey, you know, whatever you happen to think about widening sidewalks, I'm going to keep bringing that up, you know, or anything else, gathering places. We need to communicate that to Beth and to the other folks who are working on these things for us. Last thing I would say about housing is that the Council on Aging was very active in supporting the work that was being done on the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. One of the concerns that you mentioned, which I understand, I mean, Nancy and I came here because schools, and we valued the housing and the character of the town, right? And also that it was close to Boston and it had this transportation link that it's like probably many of the people here, all of you, many of you probably for the same reasons, right? You hate to see that kind of thing change. So it has to be done thoughtfully. The one assurance I would give you is that as valuable as the accessory dwelling unit bylaw will be for some people, that they can create these additional units, for better or for worse, it's going to be relatively few of those, I think, that are going to get created anytime soon. It is expensive to do, and it doesn't fit anywhere. But for some people, it is one more way in which it might provide them some relief. So we are changing as a community. I don't think it's going to be really quick, but with the change that's coming in the 21st century, we need all of our engagement. That's why meetings like this are so important, right? We need all of our engagements. It's all of our communities, a community for people of every age, right? And I think we'll get to a place that is good, I think. Anyway, sorry, I went off on that. Mike, do you have a question?
With the accessory units, could a single senior build a unit, move into it, and then rent the rest of the house?
Yes. There needs to be an eligible, correct me if I'm wrong, there needs to be an eligible person, 70, 62 and over, or somebody with a disability who lives in either what you would say is the primary part of the house or the accessory part of the house, one or the other. That person needs to be present. Okay, so we have one more speaker, and that is Ciara Somerville. Ms. Somerville is a senior research associate with the Center for Social and Demographic Research on Aging and a PhD candidate in gerontology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. She completed her undergraduate studies in 2013 at Salem State University, where she majored in mathematics and minored in English, physics, and secondary education. Ciara earned her MS in gerontology at UMass Boston in 2016, and her research interests include aging services and bridging the gaps between research policy and practice. Ms. Somerville's dissertation focuses on senior centers in Massachusetts, how they are structured and function, how they differ by type of community, and how they innovate to meet the needs of older adults. Just parenthetically here, I mentioned that we are going to be working in 2023 on updating the Jenks Center's strategic plan. The research that Ciara has done about senior centers across the Commonwealth and what they're doing and not doing and how they're meeting current needs of the people they serve is going to be very important to us. So I hope you take all this in. Ciara intends to continue conducting applied research on community features that support aging in place and aging service organizations when she wraps up her PhD. So, Ciara, thank you very much.
Okay, how's that? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Well, if that changes, don't be shy to raise your hand and tell me, get closer to the mic. Well, thank you again to Tom, Rob, and the whole Jenks Center and my fellow presenters for being here today, and all of you. Very excited to be here and share some work with you that I do at UMass Boston. So to give a brief outline of what I'll be talking about today, I'm going to give an introduction to UMass Gerontology and the center that I work for and the research that we do. And then I'll transition into talking a bit about age-friendly communities. We've heard already from Rob and I Ching about sort of what an age-friendly community is, but a little reminder. I'll then move on to talking about the Massachusetts COA and Senior Center Network sort of broadly, and then share some data that I have about how senior centers fared during sort of peak pandemic. And then I'll close out with some of my own reflections and thoughts based on what I've seen through my work about sort of where do we go next, specifically around senior centers, but certainly with implications for the whole community as it develops toward age friendliness. So UMass Boston Gerontology is one of the oldest academic gerontology programs in the country. Nearly 1 out of 4 PhDs in gerontology come from UMass Boston. So we have a long history of studying aging, sort of holistically, the different features of aging, economic security, sociology, psychology, health, so sort of the whole idea of what it means to age, we look at Gerontology Institute. The Center for Social and Demographic Research on Aging, the CSDRA, is where I work. I've been with them since 2014. So we are sort of a small applied research center based out of UMass. A big bucket of the work that we do is we work directly with communities and support and collect data from their community about the needs and interests of older residents to support planning efforts. And to date, we've worked with about 75 communities across the Commonwealth. And so we've talked a bit about what an age-friendly framework is. It's, it's a framework, right? So it's really an inclusive lens to look at your community and to plan and better develop for really all ages, right? So by adjusting the sidewalks, making sure they're level and clear, and curb cuts are good, is not only beneficial to maybe older adults who may have mobility impairments, but to people in wheelchairs or people with strollers, right? So making community development under this lens is really supportive of all ages across abilities and backgrounds. And so really the goal is to help people stay connected within the community and to maintain independence and health and remain in, the community that I believe a lot of you have lived in for most, if not all of your lives, or are newly connecting with. And so the Massachusetts Senior Center Network, councils on aging and senior centers, by sort of definition of what they do, really fit into that age-friendly framework. I'll pause and say I may use the term Council on Aging and Senior Center interchangeably throughout the rest of my presentation. I know that is not, necessarily a synonym for all communities, especially here in Winchester, where, Rob already mentioned you have a unique organizational structure. But every community in Massachusetts has a Council on Aging, an advisory board within municipal government, and most sort of serve as the senior center or either advise or really direct senior center services and programs. Activities are a big bucket of what senior centers do. Those who may not be particularly familiar with senior centers may know that most, right? So people come in for education, entertainment, physical activity. So if you pulled a random stranger off the street and said, do you know what the senior center is? They might say, oh, they play bingo. But really the senior center does a lot more than that. So another bucket is essential services. We've already heard that here at the Jenks Center, there are opportunities to get health insurance counseling if you don't know how to sign up for Medicare and Medicaid and navigating that process. If you need food support, transportation, meeting essential needs and services to continue to live independently. And also, when the senior center can't provide what you need directly, they are essential in referring and connecting you to organizations that can, like I think a lot of the vendors here. If you need in-home services, the senior center may not provide that directly, but can refer you to an appropriate organization that can get you set up. And then the last key feature that I want to highlight is really leadership in the community. The Council on Aging Senior Center is really the leader for the older population in the community, your biggest advocate to town government and beyond, and also the ones closest to the residents. The Senior Center is really the local front door to aging services. If you don't know what you need, but you have an issue, if you walk into the Senior Center, they can help you directly or connect you to the help that you need, right? So the Senior Center is really a strong connection point for residents and aging services, and also residents and town government. And I'll also note that, I've heard this phrase, if you've seen one senior center, you've seen one senior center. So the great thing about senior centers being in Massachusetts tied to local government and very community-oriented, programs, services offered are really intended to meet the needs and interests of your immediate community. So what's offered in Winchester may not be offered in Belmont or Arlington. It's really tailored to your immediate community. And so with the backdrop of the Senior Center Network in Massachusetts, under an age-friendly framework, I'm going to share some data that we collected at the center through the pandemic about how senior centers were operating at different times during 2020, which I'll refer to as sort of peak pandemic. It came about as part of the MCOA database project. So MCOA is the Massachusetts Councils on Aging. They're a nonprofit trade organization for senior center professionals. And so they provide resources and supports to the senior center network. We've worked with them to create a comprehensive database of senior centers in Massachusetts. And we were due for an update of the data in early 2020. And we were preparing our surveys to collect information about staffing, programs, services, space, to get a really wide picture of what each individual senior center looks like, and also the network as a whole. And well, then COVID happened, which it was a little bit of a wrench in our data collection plans, but also an opportunity. So the plan was to send out 3 topical surveys about, those buckets: nutrition, transportation, staffing, et cetera. And so we continued with that plan, and at each survey we included a set of questions around how is your senior center operating, how are you faring during COVID. And so this presentation, I'll share data from each of the 3 surveys conducted between April and November of 2020, and it includes responses from COA or senior center directors that responded to all 3 surveys. I just want to acknowledge briefly that the database project was supported by funding from MCOA and the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and the MCOA staff and a set of senior center directors helped develop the surveys. We work with communities frequently at the center, but we are not the ones in senior centers daily. So we really wanted to make sure we had the perspective from people who are in the community about the questions to ask about what important features of the senior center are important to include. And so in April 2020, the first survey, we asked directors, how prepared did you feel for this? And somewhat surprisingly, 40% said very well prepared, and another 45 said somewhat prepared. So the majority of people, directors who responded, felt considerably prepared for a pandemic. I personally would not have responded that, but I think that just demonstrates that senior centers in a lot of communities are already embedded into the public health emergency response network within the community. At 3 different time points in April, August, and November, we asked what are you doing? Are you doors closed, not doing anything? Are you limited on site, remote programming, or are you fully operational? So even in April of 2020, we can see that only 1% were closed entirely, that bottom red line, which April 2020 was peak. Everything pretty much had shut down except for really essential services. And again, I think this demonstrates that senior centers are essential services. And so we can see that the number who were fully closed stayed about the same between those 3 time points. And then between the blue line, which is closed to the public but continuing to serve essential services, and the yellow being open to the public, doors are open again, we can see that as time went on, those switched. So even as early as November 2020, senior centers were eager to start getting people back in their doors. We asked about what programs and services were offered at each time point, and I'll just highlight a few notes that, so the large majority across 2020 focused on telephone reassurance, outreach, and wellness checks, just getting on the phone and connecting with their residents. A sizable share, even as early as April 2020 and increased to November, were continuing to provide medical transportation and transportation to the grocery store. And then another key set of programs provided throughout 2020 included home delivered meals, curbside pickup, and food pantry. So what a lot of this suggests is that senior centers really strip down to essential services, meeting the needs of social wellness, nutrition, and transportation and medical. And we also asked, what are the primary modes that you're reaching people? The majority at all 3 time points were using the phone, and another sizable share were contacting folks by email. But I think this also demonstrates that to continue outreach, especially during the pandemic, required a wide array of outreach methods. You weren't going to get everyone by the phone. You certainly weren't going to reach everybody by email, but by using as many different ways to reach people, you were going to be able to connect with a wider net of residents than if you focused on one method. In both April and 2020, we asked about how involved the senior center leadership was in making decisions about reopening. I will note that the response options were different in April compared to November, and that was really a function of, things were changing quickly, so we adapted our questions between April and November. So in April, we had more than half of directors reporting being somewhat or very involved in decision making, and that sort of transferred over into 2020. That with a little more detail, the COA and Senior Center was working together with the municipal government to make decisions about safe practices to open back up the doors in the Senior Center, which again really demonstrates that, senior centers in Massachusetts are sort of legally embedded within town government, but even beyond that, just the collaboration and connection in decision making at such a important time demonstrates that they really are embedded within the town network. And we also included a few write-in opportunities for directors to tell us about their experiences. And so just a few quotes really demonstrated that staff and volunteers were really dedicated to continuing serving their residents. They didn't want to work from home. They didn't want to stop. They really recognized themselves as being a frontline resource to older residents. So we learned that senior centers across the state continued doing the work that they do, stripped back maybe to essential services, but never really stopped. And so moving into a post-pandemic world, recognizing that we are not fully done with COVID-19, but as we move into and hopefully past sort of the worst of it, it's important to think about, well, where are senior centers now? What can they do to continue to serve the community? And so I'm gonna share some of my thoughts, some lessons learned I've learned while doing some of the community work that we do at the center. And so I would say that senior centers are largely back to normal across the state, but continue to face some challenges. We've heard a number of senior centers having trouble bringing back people who used to be regulars 4 years ago. Some of it still being a little fearful of COVID, and some, directors have noted seeing a lot of deterioration in health, even in a short time, among some people who were vibrant just 4 years ago. So there's a lot of challenges in bringing people back, and at the same time, bringing in new participants. On the one hand, directors have mentioned that COVID was sort of an opportunity to connect with people they hadn't connected with before, and now that those folks had learned about what the senior center did during COVID, they've started to come in more regularly. On the other hand, engaging new participants or people maybe in younger, older age groups is a challenge, and is a long-standing challenge for senior centers. And then related to both of those challenges is, the social isolation that residents of all ages, but particularly older adults, have gone through during the pandemic, and the other toll it has taken on physical health, mental health, financial insecurity, food insecurity. So senior centers, these are issues that I think senior center directors have always been aware of and worked toward in their community, but the pandemic really brought those to the forefront and even heightened those challenges. And so I mentioned that bringing new people in and bringing back people is not a new issue. It's not unique to Massachusetts, but it has sort of been heightened post-pandemic. So senior centers across the country have been grappling with shifting patterns in participation. There are research articles that sort of consider the senior center population, graying. And I mean that with as much respect as possible. But, they're having a hard time bringing in, maybe the 60 to 70 crowd, partly because a lot of those adults, as we've heard, retirement age has been pushed back. They're still working. And so that is a challenge. Senior centers want to serve those people. It's what they deserve. They're entitled to it. But just getting them in the door can be challenging. And so one support for senior centers is the National Council on Aging. They are a national nonprofit that is really the leader in the senior center profession and sort of a leader who has taken charge in envisioning what a senior center can and should look like. And when I say modernizing the senior center, it's not about forget the people who have been here for years and are 85 plus and all about 60-year-olds. That's not it. It's about really learning how to strike the balance. The age group that senior centers serve, 60 to 100, is very wide, right? Someone at 85 has a different life experience, a different maybe set of needs and interests than someone who is 62 and still working. And so senior centers are at this balance point where, we want to serve all of them. We want to make everyone happy, and how do we best do that? And so I mentioned a little bit, but there are really some opportunities for senior centers at this time. One thing I heard from directors is that the pandemic was sort of an opportunity for senior centers to really show who they are and what they do to the community. And even to departments in their town government who may not even really know the importance of senior centers. Directors have said they've had town administration come to them and say, I had no idea the work you do. That mindset of, oh, the senior center is where we go to play bingo, and that's it. So the pandemic actually served as an opportunity to spread awareness about the wide range of important services done. And so building off of that, there's a real opportunity to market and highlight sort of, the wide range of offerings and people, and that it is an inclusive space for people to come into. I'll also note that I've seen a little bit of a newer culture of community engagement and development in this post-ish pandemic world. We've already heard that the town master plan has been updated. The Jenks Center is preparing to update their strategic planning. I've heard from a lot of communities that they're taking this time to really understand their community, not just older adults, but as a whole, and take a minute. We made it through, or we have made it through what I hope to be the worst of this pandemic. So communities are taking a moment, sort of assessing the layout of their residents and needs and figuring out where do we go from here. And so doing that in a strategic way with community engagement and assessment and action planning. We're kind of in a good culture for that right now. And one thing that has supported that I've seen is the availability and use of ARPA funding. That is the American Rescue Plan Act. In brief, it is federal funding that can be allocated to communities, and then they can distribute and spend it to support COVID-specific improvements such as testing, but also to make wider community improvements. For example, I know of 2 senior centers that received ARPA funding through their town government and built outdoor pavilions to improve their ability to provide outdoor programming. Another community has received ARPA funding that will fund a feasibility study in their effort to assess for a new senior or community center. So we've got this culture of assessment and figuring out how do we make the community better, and we also have the financial support through ARPA funding to actually make that happen. And then I'll also note that MCOA, the Massachusetts Councils on Aging, and the Executive Office of Elder Affairs have always been and continue to remain supportive of senior center professionals through grants, other resources in, specific how to do evidence-based programs, how to write a grant for other organizations. And so all together, senior centers are in sort of a good position, potentially, to engage with their wider community in planning and assessment to improve the community at large. And so just a few key takeaways is that senior centers never really stopped during the pandemic. So many other doors closed, but senior centers, the doors closed, but they were still there and continuing to provide for residents. And COAs and senior centers in Massachusetts, at least, are pretty fortunate to have the institutional support through town government and the state compared to other states. I believe Massachusetts is unique in which the COA is part of town government. And as the pandemic was challenging for all in so many ways. We could talk about that for a long time. But one sort of silver lining is it really has served as an opportunity for senior centers to demonstrate the value that they provide to the community and, make people and others in the community aware of just the depth of work that they do. And then lastly, what I am interpreting as a current culture for community assessment, engagement, and planning to improve the community is a really good opportunity to engage in age-friendly work. I mentioned that senior centers, the work that they already do, program services provided, really fit into the age-friendly framework. But, senior centers alone can't solve housing, right? Senior centers alone can't solve financial burden for residents. So it really does take the collaboration and coordination with other town departments and even beyond, maybe at the state level, to make change happen. And I'll also note that my impression here in Winchester is that you have a very strong senior center here at the Jenks Center. It appears your leadership is very committed in making not just inside these walls good and supportive for all of you, but even beyond the community, spearheading the age-friendly initiative. And even beyond that, I would say, having your acting town manager and your planning board and having your town government really engaged and incorporating the age-friendly framework into the master plan is a testament to how well, maybe tight-knit, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the impression I'm having here in Winchester, and that is a real asset to be able to continue to make important community developments that will benefit not just older adults, but of all ages. And so with that, I will leave it, and I'll take any questions. I got right here.
I want to make a statement now that we're on the computer and we're on Zoom and people are getting the Jenks newsletter. With people from other countries, other towns are coming to join us. And so there's not a big wall anymore. We're getting people from Stoneham and Woburn and Reading and Arlington. If they see an event that's more something that they don't have, they join us. So I see that. I think the computer changed a lot of things. And of course, the programs that we have, both actual and visual, are excellent.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And certainly, a lot of senior centers, maybe not all, did move to some remote programming on the computer through Zoom, or some did sort of phone call bingo. I've used that as an example as maybe a derogatory, but actually using the phone to play games. So the adaptations during 2020 to bring programs remote and to people in their homes is something that I think will continue to be part of senior center offerings. Yes?
Yeah, what's your take on, for example, Lexington, which is a very upscale community, and what they've done is have integrated young people and young people's programs. So it's no longer the Lexington Senior Center, it's the Lexington Community Center. And is this like a rare thing, or is this something that other senior centers might do in the future? Just wanted your take on that.
Yeah, I think in Massachusetts and maybe even across the country, there has been a little bit of a movement for community centers. But community center might mean something slightly different to each community. So a community center might be a whole space and programs and services that's fully integrated for all ages. It may be a community center, but one wing of space is dedicated toward older adults or toward younger kids, and there are still separate programs, maybe some integrated programs. So I don't think the idea of a community center and housing some of those programs and services in one space is necessarily a bad thing. All of the community work that we do through the center is community engagement. So we do focus groups, we do forums, we do surveys, so we hear directly from residents. And my take is, from what I've heard from older residents, is yes, a community center is nice. It would be nice to have interactions, intergenerational programming, but still want some of your own space. Still want some programs that are just for older adults, to just share some of that just within your age group, but not entirely siloed. Right in the back with the hat.
I'd like to give thanks for Philip, who runs this operation and provides us with these nice programs.
Yes. Yep.
I have not heard anything about the pool that's going to be put in Winchester. And certainly that would be a great thing for seniors, water aerobics, stuff like that. So I haven't heard anything, so I just wondered what's going on with the pool.
I don't know if, the answer is I don't know. And I could make things up, but I'm not going to do that. So I know that progress continues. People still continue to raise money. Planning continues. I believe there has at least tentatively been identified as an area in which that pool would go, which is near the high school. Is that right? But I don't actually know where it is. I do think that kind of facility could be wonderful, right? It'd be a wonderful thing for people to be able to use within the community, within this kind of campus that we have here in the town center. But I think we all have to stay tuned. I will tell you that it's taken so long, and even longer than we think, right? The first time the idea of a pool came up in town was probably 30 or 40 years ago. And there have been steps forward and then dormancy, and it probably now takes $15 million or so to create a pool. So it's not an easy lift, but perhaps it'll happen.
So the question is, how are other town developments?
There's large retirement centers, retirement communities. People leave town and end up in a retirement community, presumably taking a lot of retired people out of the community. Has that had a big impact on you?
I have not. I would say that, the community, the state, the country really is aging at quite a pace that, especially in Massachusetts or even this area, the number or share of people who may move out to maybe Florida or Arizona with a retirement community or even go down for the winters has not been large enough, I think, to really shift the balance in the town residents. I would say that's probably a bigger concern down the Cape, where there's such a seasonal community, and I believe Barnstable County on Cape Cod is the oldest county in the country. So during the winter, your long-term residents are older adults. That's sort of who is there. And then the summer comes and you get all these families and younger people. And so in that case, senior centers there have had to change seasonally how they provide programs.
I was thinking of communities like North Hill, and there's a lot around Concord, where are places to themselves.
Oh, I see. So like a retirement community within the community. Okay. I can't speak too much to that. In community projects we've done, we have engaged with sort of senior housing and retirement communities. And from those perspectives, people who live there still feel part of the community and still come to the senior center, and they're very happy with maybe the wraparound services that they might experience in that specific community, but still find things at their local senior centers to participate in.
Anyone else?
I will add one more note, especially hearing about that possible pool, is the best thing that I've learned when in doing this, if there's something you want or need, is to make your voice heard. Your surveys that came on your chairs, I'll do one last plug. Please fill out your surveys, and if there's programs or services that you think need to be provided here at the Jenks, let them know. Because in my experience, every voice matters, every response to a survey, every participant in a forum really matters and gets to the people who make decisions. So fill out your surveys, make your voice heard.
Okay, we're going to just quickly wrap up. I'll just speak just for a second. So we've heard a lot of things today. I hope you enjoyed, Betty, I'm sorry. I hope you've enjoyed this and you've got something out of it. I know that all of us who volunteer at the Jenks, I think that we certainly did. Among the things we heard, I think, is that it is the right moment to plan, right? It's the moment to, in fact, take what we've learned and figure out strategically the direction we need to go and the investments we need to make. I do think, and I appreciate Ciara saying this, that we have every reason to be proud of the Jenks Center. And we have every reason to be proud of the staff. And I appreciated the gentleman in the back calling out Philip. And I want to tell you that it's in many ways not an exaggeration that Philip, during his tenure here, has transformed this place. He's provided a level of stability and direction and engagement. He has supported and professionalized the staff. He provided leadership that kept our doors open, if figuratively, if not actually, during the pandemic. And he's a wonderful partner for all of us here. And so we just owe him a great deal, I think, and I wouldn't mind clapping for him again. And so I leave you with this thought that, we've been talking about age friendliness. This, in many ways, is kind of an initial re-engagement for us, for our strategic plan, which we're going to be redoing, but also to reach the broader community and to try to build fluency around the notion, the lens that we would look through to see ourselves as truly age-friendly. People of all ages, not just older folks, but kids, families, older residents. So I hope you'll be part of that conversation. You'll help further it. You'll think about the ways in which each and every one of us can contribute to making Winchester that kind of community. And again, I greatly appreciate the time that our panelists took to be here. And because it is a big commitment, and I also greatly appreciate the support that our sponsors have provided to us today. So.